One of the reasons I have a rich knowledge of pulp culture is because of things like VH1's I Love the series. These sort of moment countdown specials were such a staple of cable television and something that my brother and I would watch religiously every year. It always gave us new things to check out and made us feel really proud and smart when we knew what they were talking about because we'd already seen it or watched it. One of my favorites around Halloween each year was Bravo's The 100 Scariest Movie Moments list that started airing in 2004. That's where I first met the star of this video, number 87, Black Christmas.
I remember meeting Steve Martin for this picture, Roxanne, a long time ago, and he said, "You were in one of my favorite films of all time." And I said, "Oh, Romeo and Juliet?" And he said, "No, Black Christmas. I loved it. Saw it 27 times.
Surprisingly, not a blaxploitation movie. Sandwiched between The Wizard of Oz and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Bravo picked the opening kill from the film Black Christmas, which shows the victim being asphyxiated by a plastic dress bag. The clip and subsequent references to that kill highlight Black Christmas's amazing use of atmosphere and how, despite being relatively blood light as a horror film, it still has this chilling and sinister energy that makes it a classic in the genre. But Black Christmas also has the status of being seen as part of feminist horror canon and one of the first slasher movies, a legacy that has been solidly maintained by the original 70s film being re-released, but not so much among its remakes. In this video, I want to discuss Black Christmas across its eras, the original 70s film, the first remake in 2006, and the most recent remake in 2019, and touch on the weird relationship it has with its younger brother franchise, Halloween. Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope that you are actually outside enjoying things, and if you are stuck indoors because the weather is terrible, which is the case in New York as I'm filming, I'm glad to offer entertainment for introverts. Just wanted to let folks know that there are a few extra videos on my Patreon at different tiers, including a review of him, and then a discussion about the Apple TV show The Buccaneers and why I think it's part of this really annoying girly popification of history, and finally a video about The White Lotus season 3 and the incest plotline and getting into incest in popular culture. I'm sure you can imagine why that isn't on YouTube. I also realized I have not done a good job of highlighting things that I've been doing outside of YouTube and video stuff. So I am one of the co-hosts for the PBS Books Readers Club and have done a series of really great interviews with my fantastic co-hosts. The one that I'm really excited about right now that just recently came out is our interview with Sylvia Marina Garcia, the author of Mexican Gothic. Her new book, The Bewitching, is fabulous. I am also the co-host for the new It, Welcome to Derry, official HBO podcast with Mark Bernardin, further proof that Kevin Smith and I are meant to be friends in a totally normal way, I promise. I have also done a few podcast episodes on different things that I will list down below, including one where I unfortunately hate on My Lady Jane. I'm so sorry, but I feel how I feel. And at the end of this video, there will be an ad for Henson Shaving, where you will get the joy of seeing my bare legs. And Lola makes a little cameo. So without further ado, Black Christmas discussion time, and happy Halloween. As a genre, horror has always had a rich and complicated relationship with female characters, both in literature and on screen. But things really took a turn, in my opinion, with the development of the slasher genre, and the centerpiece of those slashers being these reoccurring, supernatural, mostly male antagonists and their mostly female victims. While there have always been monster figures in horror who prey on women, the slasher was a different kind of evil that appeared just as the culture was going through the period now known as the golden age of the serial killer. Brenna Ehrlich explains in her 2021 article for the Rolling Stone, Why Were There So Many Serial Killers Between 1970 and 2000, and Where Did They Go? A much investigated US phenomenon that seems to be relegated to a period between the 70s and early 2000s. Over those 30 years, Americans who previously left their doors unlocked and hitchhiked with abandon were suddenly caught in the sights of predators like Ramirez, and the cannibal killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who did much of their hunting during the 80s, and Keith Hunter Jesperson, aka the Happy Face Killer, a trucker who murdered at least 8 women in the early 90s. We talk about the 70s being a transformative time in cinema, and horror is no different. The violence of that period is reflected in the kind of films that we get afterwards. When trying to figure out why this changed and the serial killer died off in the public consciousness, they usually explain that society changed as a result of these crimes, and therefore the serial killer didn't necessarily go away, but it was no longer as effective. The 70s saw a lot of killers preying on hitchhikers with no compunction about getting into a car with a stranger. What ends up happening is, as a result of those crimes, women stop hitchhiking. So now that victim pool is no longer there. Murders like the Golden State Killer and the Night Stalker, who broke into homes, were then deterred by the rise in home security systems. That's why in the 90s, when the children of Vietnam vets had grown up, serial killers mainly targeted sex workers. And as the victims of serial killers get pushed to the margins, we see that being reflected in slashers, and many serial killers would end up being the inspirations, even loosely, for horror slashers. And Black Christmas is no exception, being a blending of this rise of faceless men creeping into the homes of young women and the popular urban legend of the babysitter. Usually dubbed the babysitter and the man upstairs, it is an urban legend where a young woman is babysitting usually 1 or 2 children and gets a call where someone whispers, wait, I have a phone.
Have you checked on the children?
And then eventually the babysitter calls the police to trace the calls because they won't stop. And finally the police call back and tell her,
the call is coming from inside the house.
And you hope she makes it. As it is an urban legend, there isn't a perfect example of an origin, but a lot of people connect this myth to the murder of Janet Christman. Janet was a 13-year-old girl. While babysitting, she was beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. What made the case extra chilling, and as part of this lore element, was the fact that the deputy in charge got a call and heard the screams of a young girl, but it was cut off. And eventually, they stumbled upon her dead body. While the police did look into a suspect, the police didn't follow procedure properly, shocker, leading to him being released, and the case is still considered unsolved. Art reflects society, and horror especially does this. So as we see this rise in serial killers being a subject of public interest, the horror film would take those killers and bring them from the urban environments that people are used to this kind of danger happening to a place where these horrors weren't supposed to happen, the suburbs. And it also gave an emerging teen audience a personification of the anxieties that they were feeling about a future that had been promised to them, going up against the reality ahead of them. And I'm going to just do a slight trigger warning as I read this part of the script. It's a trigger warning for history is repeating itself and people don't learn their lesson. I think you'll understand why in just a second. For middle-class American adolescents who were coming of age in this era, it became very clear that they were not going to have the same advantages and opportunities as their parents. After the post-war economic boom of the 1950s and 1960s came a decade marked by a wholly new economic problem, stagflation, a term coined to describe the particular combination of economic stagnation and inflation that had appeared by the late 1970s. Nor did the economy improved with the arrival of a new president. Ronald Reagan took office in 1981 and brought a slew of cuts to job training and school lunch programs and tightened restrictions for welfare programs. While teenagers were probably not closely following the stock market, they would certainly have been aware of their worsening job prospects and the disappearance of federal programs designed to help working and middle-class youth. By 1983, unemployment had spiked to over 10%, the highest since the Great Depression, and unemployment among 16 to 24-year-olds was 19%, nearly twice the national average. So, on the eve of adulthood, or at the very least high school graduation, young people would be staring down an unfortunate economy, an adult world fraught with peril, a world where not all of them would succeed, and they went to the movies. They went to slasher films populated by teenagers who were firmly ensconced in working and middle classes. The parents in these films were police officers and small-time real estate salesmen. They lived on idyllic suburban streets in middle American towns. They went to wholesome-seeming summer camps and spent their evenings babysitting for their neighbors. Their lives were idealized representations of the audience, but there was danger lurking in the heart of middle America. In the world of slasher films, that danger was represented by masked serial killers as anonymous and unstoppable as the market and government forces threatening their futures. And you know what? I'd rather face Pinhead 2 than this economy.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
The slasher film genre was influenced by thrillers like Hitchcock's Psycho and the Italian film genre known as giallo. Giallo films were thrillers with sexual and psychological elements with a focus on style. It was popular during the 1960s to 1970s before being taken over by the slasher genre overall. Now, the question of what is the first slasher film is a subject of debate, because what makes something the first, what's the clear line between a Psycho and a giallo film and a slasher film? Who decides that line? Well, this is my video, I get to, and I think there's a good enough way you can say that it was either this movie, Black Christmas, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I don't think it really matters which was the first. I think what matters is how quickly the genre established for itself certain rules and things that made it stand out.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex.
Slashers as a genre have the interesting factor of the face of the series. Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Pinhead, Ghostface, Leatherface, Sam from Trick or Treat are in some cases more iconic than the final girl protagonists of these movies, which makes sense in the fact that they are the constant evil across the franchise, and with that the narrative gets opportunities to expand on their mythology. Anyone can be a victim. Also, since most of them are masked, faceless men, you don't have the same issues of actors aging out of the role, since they can easily be replaced with new teenagers for the chopping block. Because so often in the genre the main victim is a woman or a young girl and the slasher is a male, it is easy to see the way in which we are repeating archetypes throughout horror. The pure heroine and the dark figure seeking to claim them. The gaslighting of not being believed because you're a hysterical woman. The slow paranoia of isolation. The ineptitude of authority figures. All of these things help situate the slasher in these pre-existing gendered tensions. Our primary and acknowledged identification may be with the victim, the enumeration of our infantile fears and desires, our memory sense of ourselves as tiny and vulnerable in the face of the enormous other. But the other is also, finally, another part of ourselves, the projection of our repressed infantile rage and desire, our blind desire to annihilate those toward whom we feel anger, to force satisfaction from those who stimulate us, to wrench food for ourselves, if only by actually devouring those who feed us, that we have had in the name of civilization to repudiate. We are both Red Riding Hood and the wolf. Another aspect I think is important to note is the time in which many of these horror film creators were coming of age in. Times of political assassination, political upheaval, the Vietnam War, and the collective consciousness of the American dream that had been presented was waking up, as well as aforementioned, the serial killers. The Manson murders really were a cultural reset, and Wes Craven said as such in 1985 when talking about his own experiences within the horror genre and criticism about it. You're probably aware that a few critics, including Robin Wood, see the contemporary horror film as a form of reaction against bourgeoisie society, in the sense that the current films show the consequences of various forms of repression. Do you feel that your own films have a consciously ideological thrust, or are they more on the order of personal statements? Craven: I wouldn't separate the two. I think the films are ideological, although I don't go into a film with the attitude of attempting to make a statement. Inevitably, certain things come out that I suppose express a specific position. One thing I think my films do express, and this is shared by some of the more recent horror films, is a sense of rage. This is not something very easily expressed, not normally found in the American cinema. Rage against the culture, against the bourgeoisie, or whatever you want to say. It may be rage against the horror of life itself. Certainly, one of the things that the horror genre does at its best is express that rage that Kurtz expresses at the end of The River. a sort of primal scream, and it's done by people who are in one way or another outside the usual mainstream of art, who figure they have nothing to lose. When I did Last House, I was in this situation. Nobody knew me. I had quit teaching. I was living in New York, letting my hair grow, and just letting all the stops out. I wasn't thinking about making a political statement as much as letting myself go in the freest way possible to see what comes out. At the same time, I was very aware politically. He also goes on to say, when I was speaking of Kurtz earlier, I was referring to Heart of Darkness, which did have some effect, I think, on my attitude towards the horror film. But more importantly, I think the horror film has become a specific way of digesting horror that really is all around us. You can't look at the annual issue of Life magazine without seeing piles of dead bodies, people being machine gunned as a matter of course. It seems to be a time when people are being ground up in huge tectonic movements. I don't think anyone buys the John Wayne image of how we confront violence, both collectively and the individual. We can't kid ourselves that Lieutenant Calley was some sort of monster. He was the most ordinary of guys. Wes Craven, he knew his craft. He knew his craft well. On that note, let's get into Black Christmas. Black Christmas was first developed by Canadian screenwriter Roy Moore, who intended for the film to be a pretty traditional proto-slasher film. That was changed with the introduction of director Bob Clark, who would go on to create, among many other films, A Christmas Story, and my personal guilty pleasure, Baby Geniuses. I think Baby Geniuses and Small Soldiers are two bad movies that I think about all the time.
You put munitions, chips, and toys?
He wanted to make things more ambiguous, inject some body humor into the story, and really allow us to connect with our main characters.
It's Fellatio 20880. Fellatio. It's a new exchange, FE.
Significant people in the cast are Olivia Hussey, who had just become known for her role as Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, and signed on to this film because she was told by a psychic that she would earn a lot of money, and she would end up playing the final girl, Jess. The role of Mrs. Mack, the sorority mother, was offered to Bette Davis, but she turned it down, and it makes me sad because I love Bette Davis and I would just love to see her in this role, and I do weep at the loss, but the actress that we have playing Mrs. Mack is also really good.
These broads, the leaning tower of Pisa, if they can get up there.
And Margot Kidder signed up to play Barb because she wanted to play a role that was wild and out of control. This was before she became Lois Lane, but I think after she did Sisters. Black Christmas is about a sorority house that is being harassed by a mysterious caller called the Moaner, or Billy, who has been making vulgar calls to the house. We as the audience know instantly that the caller has already made his way into the attic of the house. During the latest of these prank calls, Barb provokes the killer, provokes in air quotes, which freaks out Claire Harrison, one of the girls, who decides to go upstairs to finish packing before going to meet her father. Using the house cat Claude as bait, the killer brings Claire into the closet and suffocates her, and drags her body up to the attic where it slowly mummifies. Claire's father arrives the next day because she didn't meet him at the train station, which causes concern since in addition to Claire going missing, a 13-year-old girl is also missing.
So I came over here.
Yeah, well, is it really so unusual for her to be just a few hours late, Mrs. Quaid?
Oh, yes. She should have been home at noon.
Meanwhile, Jess is dealing with the fact that she is pregnant and is going to get an abortion, but her boyfriend Peter is against the idea and takes out his frustrations during a recital and fails very comically and then makes it his girlfriend's problem.
I'm going to have an abortion.
You can't make a decision like that. You hadn't even asked me.
I wasn't even going to tell you.
A search is brought together to try and find the young girl and Claire, but only the body of the young girl is found, putting everyone on edge and causing the police to have to take the escalating calls from the mysterious caller seriously.
A high school girl's been murdered. Mr. Harrison's daughter is missing. And now at the house where she lives, the other girls are getting obscene phone calls. Don't you think we ought to look into it, Nash?
Well, Lieutenant, I guess, sure.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
But not before Margot Kidder's Barb is stabbed with a crystal unicorn. Symbolism. Peter calls Jess while their phone is being monitored by the police, making a very aggressive call, leading the police to believe that Peter is the killer. Jess doesn't quite believe that because he was there when one of the calls was made, but after he appears upstairs after Jess finds two of her friends dead, it's not looking great for him personally, especially since when the police are finally able to trace the call, they tell Jess,
Yes, the caller is in the house. The calls are coming from the house. Jess! Jess, get up! And don't go up there.
Jess locks herself in the basement, but when Peter attempts to break in, she ends up killing him with the fire poker. The police think case closed and leave Jess in her bedroom in the sorority house where multiple murders have taken place. We see that the killer is not Peter, and the killer is still alive, leaving Jess's ultimate fate unknown, and the body of Claire and Mrs. Mack, who was also killed early in the movie, still in the attic unfound. What was revolutionary about the film, and remains that way, is the fact that the final girl, Jess, decides that she wants to have an abortion and speaks openly about why that's going to be her choice, regardless of her boyfriend Peter insisting upon her having the baby.
Do you remember when we first met? You told me about your wanting to be a concert pianist, how it was your greatest dream. And I told you about some of the things that I wanted to do. I still want to do those things. You can't ask me to drop everything I've been working for and give up all my ambitions because your plans have changed. Be realistic. I can't marry you.
Sure you can. What does it change? We could be married. You could still do anything you wanted to do.
Peter, I don't want to marry you.
Jess is one of the first final girls, yet she is not often the subject of a lot of critical looks by some feminist horror critics. Carol K. Clover's important her body himself gender in the slasher film doesn't mention her or Black Christmas at all in her analysis, because I think Jess is kind of an outlier in what the final girl will eventually look like, especially in the fact that she is an adult. Slashers love to kill teenagers in that sweet, sweet liminal space between adulthood and adolescence. Jess and the sorority girls are still young adults, but they're certainly meant to be 18, 19, and older. They drink, they have sex, they date, they have jobs, lives. They are full adults. Jess is actively thinking about her career ambitions. She's also very feminine, something that Clover will say is atypical to the traditional final girl's identity. She is the one who encounters the mutilated bodies of her friends and perceives the full extent of the preceding horror and of her own peril, who is chased, cornered, wounded, whom we see scream, stagger, rise, fall, and scream again. She is abject terror personified. If her friends knew they were about to die only seconds before the event, the final girl lives with the knowledge for long minutes or hours. She alone looks death in the face, but she alone also finds the strength either to stay the killer long enough to be rescued or to kill him herself. The final girl is boyish, in a word. Just as the killer is not fully masculine, she is not fully feminine. Not, in any case, feminine in the ways of her friends. Her smartness, gravity, competence in mechanical and other practical matters, and sexual reluctance set her apart from the other girls and ally her, ironically, with the very boys she fears or rejects, not to speak of the killer himself. Lest we miss the point, it's spelled out in her name. Stevie, Marty, Terry, Lori, Stretch, Will. Not only the conception of the hero in Alien and Aliens, but also her name Ripley owes a clear debt to the slasher tradition. One of the things the slasher has become known for is punishment. Death because they drink or smoke or have sex. That isn't really the case clearly in Black Christmas. There's no reason given for why Billy is doing what he's doing. If anything, we can imply he does it because he can. These women live relatively alone and independently and therefore are vulnerable. They don't lock their doors. They think they are safe, and he is taking advantage of that on Christmas holiday taboo. As well as because it is a sorority house, people don't take them seriously. What I think is clever about the introduction of Claire's father into the narrative is that he shows that simply by having a male presence in this confusion allows authority to bend to his will.
Oh, yeah? What's the address? 6 Belmont Street. How many calls? Well, did you call the phone company? Oh, yeah? Well, miss, we're very busy here. There's been a child murdered in the park. I don't know when we can get a man on it. It's probably just one of your boyfriends playing a little joke. Yeah, well, I'll report it and try to get a man on it just as soon as possible.
A high school girl's been murdered. Mr. Harrison's daughter is missing. And now at the house where she lives, the other girls are getting obscene phone calls.
Even a character like Barb, who gets the most phallic death and is the most problematic of the bunch, is treated with a sense of compassion and empathy by the narrative. If she's being punished for anything, it is that she spoke up for herself and the other women being harassed. She catcalled the catcaller back, and Billy makes her death the most violent because of it. It's a reflection of his insecurities, not her moral failing, especially because all the girls are different and they all get killed and harassed. It isn't anything that she did specifically. Black Christmas also isn't leery or exploitative in how it treats its female characters, and in the limited time we get to see them, you understand their bond as sisters. You understand why Jess is trying and screaming to try and save Barb and Phil, because they are friends, real friends, and there is a part of her that can't stand to leave them behind unless she knows they are dead. And I think that because we spend a lot of quiet time with those characters, we feel that bond really truly.
Phil! Bob! Please answer me! Please answer me! Please!
Released to mixed reviews, the film was called a routine shocker and that it maddeningly overreaches in a gratuitously evasive ending, which, you know, I disagree, but it did make good money, and there were talks of a sequel with Olivia Hussey returning that did not pan out. Although it did allegedly inspire, in some ways, another holiday-themed movie, but we will get there in a moment. Remakes have always been a way for companies to milk their IP into oblivion. In the late 90s, early 2000s, we saw a mix of original horror films following the success of Scream, like I Know What You Did Last Summer, but also remakes of either Japanese films or older cult classics. Among these came the 2003 film Willard. It was not billed as a traditional remake, but loosely inspired by the book The Rat Man's Notebooks and the film adaptations Willard from 1971 and Ben in 1972. Willard is about an antisocial young man who is friends with rats, in particularly a white rat named Socrates and a black rat named Ben. He lives with an overbearing mother, of course, and works for what used to be his father's company before a hostile takeover that leads to him having like a shitty boss. Ben starts a rat gang and eventually uses that rat gang to take over, and eventually after Willard tries to poison them because he tries to live a regular life, they turn on Willard and eat him. And this was part of an era where like kids just had psychic abilities to weird shit, you know. They were hooking up with snakes, spiders, rats, you know. Ugh. Get me a pangolin. Anyway, the 2003 Willard remake was written and directed by Glenn Morgan, and the film got great reviews, especially for Crispin Glover in the lead role, even though it didn't make that much money. It was successful enough to put Morgan in conversations for other horror projects. Morgan and fellow producer James Wong, which brought them to the Black Christmas remake, and they were excited for the project, but then Trigger warning, the Weinsteins got involved. Bob and Harvey Weinstein had a lot of disputes with Morgan and Wong about the tone of the film, its conclusion, which led to rewrites and reshoots that ended with Morgan pretty much now dismissing the project and saying that he hates it. And honestly, I get it. 2006's Black Christmas decides that what we need is a backstory. The sorority house is actually the former home of one Billy Lutz, a jaundice-afflicted man who was raised in an abusive household, was raped by his mother so she could become pregnant with a baby girl named Agnes. Over years of abuse, Billy eventually killed his mother and stepfather and made cookies out of her human flesh. He was taken to a mental asylum and Agnes was put into an orphanage. So naturally they thought, let's make this into a Delta house. And in this new version, we do open with the new Claire being killed in a similar way to the original Claire, but with much less pathos. This will be a common issue with the 2006 version of Black Christmas. It will share certain character beats with the original, especially in terms of certain kills or character moments, but it never took the time to have some sense of solidarity between the girls. There's one scene where one character is puking and Michelle Trachtenberg's character helps her with that, which is like the closest we get to it. But overall, it's just kind of like very campy and very quippy. Claire is murdered in the very same scene we see her in, and while the original version wasn't like a massive character study, we get a sense of who she was before she died. Many of the deaths in the original Black Christmas have this feeling of a life being interrupted. In comparison, it feels like these girls literally just appeared to be in this movie, and that's it. We have Katie Cassidy as Kelly Presley, the closest we get to a lead character, Michelle Trachtenberg, R.I.P., as Melissa Kitt, Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Heather Fitzgerald, Lacey Chalbert as Dana Mathis, Crystal Lowe as Lauren Hannon, and Kristen Klock as Lee. And returning from the original as a new character, Andrea Martin as Mrs. Mack. She played Phil in the original. Everyone knows that Billy killed and ate his family in this house, and they all leave out gifts for him each Christmas. Why? I don't fucking know. And when Claire doesn't show up, her half-sister, Lee, comes to the house, and they slowly realize that someone is killing them off one by one. Due to the storm, they are unable to get police help or really leave, so they make the decision to stay in the house and keep an eye on each other, and then subsequently keep leaving each other. Kelly's boyfriend, Kyle, is conveniently placed there because he's in a weird sex tape with another one of her sorority sisters. But it's really just, he's just there so he can be dragged up to the attic and then killed by Agnes. Gasp. But wait, was she Billy the whole time? No, because this is 2006 and we're going to reheat Scream's nachos. And so they have two killers now. It's Agnes and Billy working together to kill all these girls. Why? Who could say? I will say the sequence of Kelly being stuck in the wall with both of these lesser Targaryens coming after her was one of the better sequences in the film. It was actually quite intense, and I think that Kelly and Lee escaping and burning down the house with Billy and Agnes inside following that sequence would have been a really good way to end the film. Unfortunately, the Weinsteins disagreed. So instead, we get a tacked on hospital sequence of Billy being alive, killing Lee. This sequence feels out of place, especially since it does end previously on a highly emotional note that I think is satisfactory. But it's like, no, we're going to just throw in extra gory bullshit because that's how horror was in the 2000s. The ending he used was different than the original. Was that because it was well known and he wanted to get away from it? Glenn Morgan. No. Originally, Katie's character was in her hospital bed and Kristen's character came to visit her. And Kristen brings her personal effects from the EMT took off Katie. The cell phone rings in the envelope. They take it out and the caller ID says Billy. The two of them just look at the phone. And then there was a complicated shot that went from the cell phone outside the third floor of the hospital where it was snowing. That was the ending, akin to what Barb Clark did in the original. And Bob Weinstein said, no, you can't do that anymore. And he said to add all kinds of stuff. At the time, I don't remember if it was Cabin Fever or Hostel or what, but that's what he wanted. The Weinsteins were not involved in the inception, but Mark Cuban and Todd Wagner brought part of the Weinsteins' company, so any movies they had would now be released by the Weinsteins. At that point, I felt like I wanted to walk. I thought we'd just do our best and hopefully it would blow everybody away, but that just didn't happen. They were telling me that isn't what horror movies are like now. All that stuff with Kristen getting killed at the end, they did all that. After the movie was finished, we got a call from Weinstein's marketing guys about going to pick up some shots for TV spots, ornaments and stuff. So I said, okay, go ahead, being a good sport. I get a call from the focus puller about being in LA shooting some stuff for the TV spots. He was telling me something about carrying a gun. So I looked into it and they shot footage of Michelle Trachtenberg running around with a shotgun. There's a weird lawnmower electric light thing on the roof. So if the audience sees that and likes it, they go to the movie and don't see it. And if they don't like it, they don't go to the movie. I'm sure it was against guild rules and I didn't understand. Not a fun time being had. Black Christmas 2006 did well financially, but it was disliked by critics and its creators. And while now there has been an audience emerging for it because they enjoy the campy 2000-ness of it, I think it really just fails to say anything as a film. If I'm looking at the thesis of like Black Christmas and feminism as a thing, I don't think that 2006 was a great time for feminism, but even the casual inclusion of a sex tape being linked and sent, you'd think would have some kind of payoff or something to say about the nature of sex tapes, considering at that point we'd had 2 high-profile ones happening. I think maybe 3, but nothing is really said about it that really moves anything. Like, both people who are in the sex tape get killed. It's not even infidelity. It's just kind of like an awkward coincidence that he slept with one of her, sisters or whatever. And I'm like, okay. It just doesn't really make any sense. And I'm not saying that inherently, like, it has to say something about gender and sisterhood, but like, Black Christmas is about gender and sisterhood in some way. It doesn't have to be hitting you over with a hammer, but I think if you're going to include a sex tape side plot, there should be some sort of reason for that. And even when they try to kind of highlight something about sisterhood, it's really about Claire and Lee, and we don't know anything about their relationship except what's monologued to us, because they're half sisters and have kind of like, they're supposed to reconcile, but then they never get a chance to do so, and it's like, that's great, but I don't know Claire. I don't play World of Warcraft. I'm playing Hello Kitty Island Adventure. So like, I don't really know what you want me to feel about this relationship that you have not established or dealt with. Even though Claire is not like a giant character in the original Black Christmas, because she's situated as part of this group of girls and they're all nervous about her, and we get to see her bedroom and her father is there. That's kind of like an organic relationship. It's not like a weird backstory about that. Like, we learn about Claire because people care about Claire and they want to figure out what happened to her. In this, she's just another dead body. And I think that's a shame. All right, sidestep to Halloween really quick. As I was writing the script, I realized that in my mind, Halloween and Black Christmas are very linked. They very much share a cultural breadth in the way that their works have evolved together. As many people know, 1978's Halloween is a game changer for the Halloween slasher genre, despite not being the first, because again, that in my mind would either be Texas Chainsaw or Black Christmas. It popularized so many aspects of what we know about the genre today. Like, Laurie Strode is considered to be the original final girl because of how successful this movie was. And I think the first Halloween and first Black Christmas share a similar shell of having this figure slowly cause harm in this supposedly safe area with a female heroine at the center. What Halloween does do is have a very clear killer from the beginning. Michael Myers, who becomes sort of like the figurehead of the dark side, and Laurie Strode, who is an equal main character. So you have 2 protagonists, one of them being a faceless killer who you can use again and again. Black Christmas, in comparison, has a faceless killer, and I think it's effective for what it's trying to say, as in, like, the danger is not specific to this one event. It is sort of like a stand-in for a universal evil. Michael Myers is somewhat situated in a dynamic that's very intimate. He's this young boy who kills his sister after his sister has sex. That is provocative in a way that I think launched 1,000 think pieces. But again, we had that element of babysitting, of safety being disturbed, where Billy is playing a role that speaks to the larger unknown male violence of the 70s. Michael signifies this fear of the seemingly normal boy next door being a secretly violent person. That link between sex and punishment at the beginning with Michael killing his sister, and then as the series progresses, these family annihilator impulses that drive him situate Michael into all the terrifying aspects of the white male serial killer in multiple forms. And then in 2007, there was a remake of the original Halloween with Rob Zombie directing it that took a different look at the series by focusing on the origin of Michael Myers.
Elvis died. I had to flush him.
Oh, honey, I'm sorry.
Rob Zombie wanted to get into the background of Michael as a character, showing him coming of age from an abusive home. And if 1970s Michael Myers was born during the golden age of the serial killer, 2007's Michael Myers was born during the age of Criminal Minds. This era of attempting to pathologize these white male characters and tie their evil into something tangible psychologically. What Zombie really did was make Michael more human than human. Cut that. I don't know. No, I'll keep it, whatever. He's not just pure evil. He has like an actual psychological disorder, and he's not like supernatural. He's just really big and strong. It's very grounded, it's kind of like grounded fantasy horror edition. This incarnation of Michael wants to reunite with Laurie so they can be a family again, rather than have this kind of weird urge to kill that was in the original continuity. It's a lot of Jason Voorhees dripped into this version of Michael in my mind. And I think it's also interesting that we get back-to-back remakes of two classic, important horror films that follow this same inclination to pathologize and understand the killer. We learn so much more about Billy in Black Christmas 2006 than like anyone else. And Michael is truly the protagonist of the first half of 2007's Halloween. And, before you think I'm the only one who noticed this, it was brought up actually to the director of 2006's Black Christmas, which was very validating to me because, I wrote the script and I was looking at different lines and stuff, and then someone brought it up and I'm like, yes, I'm smart as fuck. Speaking of Halloween borrowing from Black Christmas, I don't know if you saw the remake of Halloween that Rob Zombie made, but one of the elements brought to the new Black Christmas was Billy's background. I find it amazing that about the same amount of time after the original Black Christmas, Halloween followed and trod the same ground, and now you make this new Black Christmas keeping the same idea of the original but expanding the psychological depth of who he was. And then in the next year or two, Rob Zombie Halloween film comes out, showing Michael as a little boy and building his psychology, and then remaking the film in the last hour. I don't know if you saw that, but I feel like I can't be the only one who noticed. Do your own research, kids. ChatGPT can't do this. In 2018, Halloween had its third and a half softly relaunch, if you count Season of the Witch. Was Halloween a sequel to the original Halloween, which means that Michael and Laurie were no longer siblings, and it is a totally different canon revisited with a kind of generational divide issue with same title, different characters, but bringing someone back. But it did start its own trend of revisiting these classic horror stories, but with a new twist. But Black Christmas in its usual form did the same thing, but a little differently. Director Sophie Takal originally pitched an idea for a remake of I Spit on Your Grave, the classic rape revenge film. Instead, she was offered to do a remake of Black Christmas, which explains a lot about the 2019 incarnation of the film. Our main character is Riley Stone, played by Imogen Poots, the best character in the bunch, a member of a sorority at Hawthorne College. She is dealing with PTSD following being raped by Brian Huntley, the president of the male fraternity.
The only place Brian Huntley belongs is in jail for what he did to Riley.
We're going skiing together. Don't worry. It's consensual.
Riley's sorority sister, Chris, is also stoking a lot of gender discourse because she requested the university founder's bust be removed, and Professor Carrie Elwes is in trouble for not teaching books by women or BIPOC people in his class.
And it's very difficult for me to do my job, teaching the curriculum, which does happen to contain many white male writers, when there's a petition circulating to have me fired.
I rewatched all of these movies back to back when I was working on this video, and I gotta tell you, like, watching this movie was very difficult. I always try to remind myself that just because I've seen a bunch of movies and I've invested time into academically reading about feminist horror doesn't mean everyone else does or needs to. And especially at this period that we're talking about, we're in the Get Out era of having horror that dealt directly with societal issues and having it be the very clear message of the film. But it is important to understand that they still have to be movies. Whereas with Black Christmas 2019, it feels like it's taking all of the issues of the day, of Me Too and rape culture and all these kind of things, and throwing them into a blender. And the director spoke about wanting to make the movie as feminist as possible, yet creates a character in Chris, one of two POC characters, who is so cartoonishly obnoxious and cruel to her rape survivor friend that you think she's a straw man until it becomes clear that is not the case.
This way of life is unsustainable, Riley. What Brian did to you, it's awful. And it's terrible that nobody believed you. But you can't just sit on the sidelines alone forever. You're gonna keep shrinking and shrinking until there's nothing left of you. You used to be a fighter. It's time to be a fighter again. If not for yourself, for your sisters.
As the movie progresses, girls go missing, and we find out that the fraternity is a black magic cult that is using brainwashing to control the men and makes them murder unruly women. So much effort. Honestly, a podcast will do the same thing. Anyway, Riley ends up overpowering Brian, and then they lock the boys in, and evil Carrie Elways, and they light everything on fire to destroy the patriarchy, I guess. Merry Christmas. If I had to say which was a worse remake, 2006 or 2019, that would be really difficult because they are both bad in different ways. But what makes the 2019 remake frustrating is that it has really, really, really good intentions that I believe in, that I do not feel were realized in the film by the way this film was written and by what it was sort of facing internally in terms of coming out. And I'm going to be quoting from I Spit on Your Celluloid, The History of Women Directing Horror Movies by Heidi Honeycutt, which was one of my sources for this movie, and I loved this cover. I think, actually, Because Rewind, you bought this for me when we went to go see a movie together. I loved it because, I love The Love Witch, despite the director getting on my nerves. And in it, the director says, "My version of Black Christmas is about a group of women who are sorority sisters at college who start to disappear one by one. The remaining sisters have to figure out why these women are disappearing and who's responsible for it. And eventually, once they figure out who the bad guy is, they have to fight for survival." Even though it's very, very loosely based on Black Christmas, I'd say the plot is extremely different. It's more inspired by the feeling that Black Christmas made me feel watching it. This idea of misogyny always being out there and never totally eradicatable. I wanted to make something that reflected our time right now, drawing more from what the original evoked for me rather than great plot points. For me, it was about what does it mean to be a woman in 2019. I didn't just want to make a movie about a bunch of women getting slaughtered. I call this movie a fiercely feminist film, so I don't mind being asked about that at all. The timeline issue is that it was brought to the director, to Sophie, in March of 2019. Slated for a release date in December 2019. Even with a co-writer, that's a very fucking fast turnaround for a movie. Within 2 months, we didn't really have time to question ourselves or to waste any time. So if something wasn't working, then it wasn't working. We were both experienced enough to know when something just wasn't quite right. And the supernatural element of the cult was Wolf's idea. Before I came on, Sophia was writing this film solo and was hitting a wall because she was killing off a bunch of women and not feeling it or feeling good about it. It was a weird time in American life. I gave her some notes on her script. I offered a few suggestions for ways she might be able to create some healthy distance from murdering women and lean into campier, thematic, metaphorical bits that would allow her to complete the project. She shined to one of my suggestions, which was the supernatural element, and we took it from there and started writing together. So as soon as I came onto the project, I knew that was my directive. I think that that's a really fucked up thing to do, to give someone like that short of a time to do a remake of a very big film. But I think what I find frustrating about the conversation and like what I'm hearing from this, and again, I think that the harassment they faced was gross. Like they got a lot of weird death threats from people who like, you ruined the movie. And it's like, I think the movie sucks, but like that's always OD and over the top, and I don't know why people do that. Well, I know why they do it. They just hate women. But I think the problem that I have is that being a message first film can work, but you have to do it well within the medium that you're working in. And it feels like this movie is never a movie. It is just monologues of ideas and concepts. The characters don't feel developed. The setting doesn't feel developed. The cult feels nonsensical. And I think what's frustrating is that, like, you know, sorority cult horror is already a thing. You know, like all of these elements could work, but it never really gets to sit and do anything together. It's just kind of like going for it. Even though Imogen Poots delivers a really moving performance as Riley, it tries to expand the concept to a point that it becomes not even campy, but just straight up farcical, especially because it is serious. Like, this is a serious topic. Again, it doesn't feel like it's being taken seriously. And, you know, cult movies exist. Midsommar. You have cult movies about gender and race, but you have to take time to evolve it. And if we're going to center this story around a rape survivor in a college setting during 2019, during Me Too, I don't think her best friend should peer pressure her into confronting her rapist in a really terrible, bitchy, condescending way with no consequences for it. I think that the vile behavior that the female talent behind this had to face was really, really gross. And I also wish that when we had movies that were leading with being feminist horror, that I felt as if they actually took the time to understand what that means.
Calvin Hawthorne was a racist and a sexist. He owned slaves in the North.
I think part of why we haven't seen a lot of good feminist horror in the most recent days, that's like very much their branding, is because we've lost the plot of what feminism means politically and what feminism can mean narratively. Feminism as a political ideology has gone through highs and lows in the public eye. Through the 2010s, we saw the broadening of feminism to become more inclusive, to focus that feminism was about giving women choices, to really make it more popular amongst people that were not into it growing up. Like when I was growing up, feminism had been presented for years in pop culture as being an ideology about man-hating lesbian ball busters. But slowly, with the rise of the girl boss and mainstream feminism becomes something that the average woman could talk about, more people embraced it as an ideology, but still didn't understand it in a political context. It just became very vibes-based, still building my empire, you know, problematic toxic culture, but make it pink. Yes, feminism does mean equality between the sexes and of all genders, but that goes beyond choice. And I know I've mentioned it before, but part of what is so compelling about the book Backlash is seeing how, despite not making any real progress, you see early on conservative women rejecting feminism and saying, we've gone too far. It's been 6 years. We really want men. You know, it's like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was passed in 1974. And then less than a decade later, right-wing women and publications were saying, has feminism gone too far? Have equal rights gone too far for women? Mind you, marital rape only became a crime in all 50 states in this country in 1993. But in the 80s, it's like, women are ball busters. You can kind of see more of this in my video about the Stepford Wives from a couple of years ago. And we are in a time and place where feminism is now accepted by a lot of people, but most have no idea what the political history is, have no idea how to be intersectional. Many have allowed their gender politics to drift into gender essentialism and become transphobic TERFs because they didn't actually learn feminism from academic books or see it as a breathing, growing ideology or gender studies. They learn it online, which isn't inherently a bad thing if you're intellectually curious, if you do not stop your education at me, like I cited my sources and I do have an advanced degree, but like I'm not a professional educator in that sense. Whenever I see a movie that promotes itself as being a capital F feminist film, right, but has no black female characters darker than a paper bag, or characters of color that are dark-skinned in general, I don't believe you. If you're repeating very biological, gender-critical language, even by accident, I don't believe you. If your feminist character acts unironically like they were born from the mind of Alan Bloom, there is a problem. One of the moments in the 2019 Black Christmas that like particularly like gets to me is that, the sexist Carrie Elway's character reads a passage from a book that is sexist in language and then goes, "Who do you think wrote this, a man or a woman?"
Men, bonding together, invented culture as a defense against female nature. Sky Cult was the most sophisticated step in this process. For its switch of the creative locus from earth to sky is a shift from belly magic to head magic. Who here can tell me what they think this writer is trying to suggest? It may surprise you to know that the writer is one Dr. Camille Paglia.
But the movie doesn't explain who that is. And also, it's 2019. We know women, especially white women, can be conservative. Conservative women are not new. They were not invented on TikTok, And for those who don't know, like, Camille Paglia is a turfy, weird feminist who wrote like one pretty good book and has spent like their career in culture wars discourse. She claims to be transgender, but then is transphobic. They don't believe in climate change. None of this is mentioned in the movie. It just dropped out there as like it's like if that one scene in Tar was the entire film. You know what I mean? And it's very frustrating. I also think that, horror already lends itself to issues of marginalized anxiety. We don't need you to make it so explicit that it becomes a lecture. And even if there are moments where you feel like a lecture needs to happen, have it happen within the medium you are using. Film. Tell us a story. Use the narrative. Like, to me, 2020's The Invisible Man is a great example of a feminist sci-fi horror movie in the sense narratively it deals with a character who is a survivor of domestic violence that is dealing with psychological and financial warfare because her rich ex-husband is stalking her. And no one will believe her because he can turn invisible, and that doesn't make sense to people. Believe women. And it's incredible because it's both, a great film about domestic violence and an effective horror movie. It does both things because it understands the horror and gendered violence within that situation and just puts it on screen. It doesn't have to lecture to you. It just does it, and you know what it is. Black Christmas 1974 did not intend to be a film with feminist leanings, but the decision to allow Jess to be firm in her decision to have an abortion and to not be punished because of that is radical. And this is not a plug, but there is a new book out called Scream With Me, Horror Films and the Rise of American Feminism from 1968 to 1980 by Eleanor Johnson that deals with domestic horror films from that time period that she put together in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned and that anxiety. It doesn't mention Black Christmas. Shame, but it is still a really interesting read, and it fits into this whole idea of how horror movies can really situate you and situate marginalized people in their anxiety. But there's this really interesting part that spoke to me that I'm just gonna read for you guys. The return to the 1970s isn't only about reproductive rights either. The numerous laws that passed in the 1970s and 1980s to protect women from violence in the home are gradually being undermined by complex legal and social forces. On top of that, the modes by which domestic violence take place are ever evolving and getting harder and harder to detect and prosecute. Very, very few states in the U.S. have laws capacious enough to protect women, especially married women, from things like cyberstalking, hacking, cyberbullying, surveillance, technological abuse, sexual violence, or other controlling and dehumanizing behaviors that a domestic partner may inflict upon them. On top of that, women still haven't won equal rights under the law. Despite the fact that the ERA came before the Senate again as recently as 2023, it still failed to be made into law. Joe Biden's Hail Mary proclamation that the ERA should be considered ratified does not, in fact, have the force of law, and the ERA seems unlikely to get ratified by the current legislature. So now, again, American women live in a reality in which their political, physical, medical, and legal equality are under threat. But in truth, they have always been. But now we're looking at a regression to an environment the likes of which we haven't seen since the early 1970s. Especially more with white women, but that was another story. And I think with the situation that we're in, with the realities of what we're dealing with the rise in conservative pipelines for not just white women, but women of all races being pulled into it, we have a great place to really have great horror that deals with these sort of anxieties. But we have to make sure that they're movies. It's not enough to just have diversity, but not have a great story. Because what ends up happening is that the diversity becomes a target. It becomes treated as if it's just a marketing ploy. It makes it feel as if you don't actually have a story to tell. You just want to yell at your audience. And that's unenjoyable. And there are so many ways to tell great stories, to tell great dark narratives. And we're in a great space for it. I mean, reading that quote from earlier, we're in the end game of the 70s now, baby. Okay? We're living Ronald Reagan's greatest dreams right now. It's time to make the art. And that's why we can't fucking allow AI to take over our lives, because AI could never understand what we're dealing with. Okay? So that's my ramble about Black Christmas. I hope you guys have a great Halloween. I will be out in the streets, being a natural blonde, as usual, as is my want. But thank you guys for watching, and stick around for the ad. Today's sponsor is Henson Shaving. So this Halloween, I decided to potentially embarrass myself and be Hollywood from Cool World for Halloween. Yes, I know, me. A natural blonde. And I put off till the very last minute to shave my legs. Just look at those gams. And don't worry, I'm wearing shorts underneath this Magic the Gathering t-shirt. I've actually used Henson's razors before this sponsorship, and I really like their new packaging. The materials are made out of aluminum and comes with these individual blades. Now, the first time I used this, I was a bit intimidated, but it is a lot less scary once you just take your time and read and follow the instructions. The blades are recyclable, and because you're just paying for the blade, you aren't dealing with the pink up tax or having an entirely new plastic top that will eventually need to be thrown away. Protect the planet. The shower cream is also really nice, and after shaving it, I'm touching my legs now, they still feel really smooth. So here's me shaving my legs while listening to Sleep Token, a delightful moment. And you can see my comic tattoos. There's the Catwoman headpiece from the Batman movie on my left ankle, and then Storm's headpiece on my right. And the Storm tattoo was the second tattoo I ever got. Hi, Lola. Henson's Razors delivers a smooth shaving experience that is efficient, well-engineered, and understands that smooth skin is a genderless delight. So go to hensonshaving.com/princessweeks and enter Princess Weeks at checkout to get 100 free blades with your purchase. All right, now that I am smooth, it's time for me to become blonde.